I guess I'm live now. I want to start with a positive note. It goes like this: either you run the day or they runs you. So that's the reason I started dedicating time for myself. Just learn singing, music theory, anything of that sort. I'm just closing up my social. I can hear you. I, okay, that's yeah. Okay. I'm just gonna start learning. Just getting to Udemy. I'm just trying to open a course so that I could learn. Uh, no, 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 no. Where did I get this music theory word? Oh, right. Well, now get a visit code, login. Yeah, right. I just got a mail from senior manager. Code, where do I see the code? Okay, I didn't see any code here. Hmm. 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 And I have to do it in some other. Oh, oh, I get a notification. Okay. This is not course I log in for. Forgot now. Okay. Ah, alright. Let me see if I could hear even.
Full melodies and
Like I can hear. How do I know? Okay, this is here. One note. What a noun is a staff paper. Hmm. Who are we learning this from? Adam. What is guy's name? Jason Allen. I remember Jason Allen. Do we have a book for him? Nope. We have a separate book for Jason Allen. Okay, book is there. What's the name of the thing? Master the Art of Learning Music by any. Okay, and which lesson are we in?
Hey everyone, welcome to Ear Training and Oral Skills Part 1. In this class, we're going to focus on ear training when it comes to rhythms. This is going to be a 6-part class. We're going to work through rhythms, then intervals, then melodies, then chord progressions, chromatic intervals, chromatic melodies. So what we're doing here is focusing on this skill that all professional musicians have and that you can develop with some practice. This is the skill to be able to hear something and then just play it, or to hear something and then be able to write it down. In this first class, we're going to focus primarily on that writing it down part and start to build that skill that we call dictation, so that when we get to full melodies and chord progressions and everything, you have all the tools you need to be able to just hear those things and figure them out in a flash. Now, I want to be super upfront with you here. This is not a class where you're going to watch me talk for 3 or 4 hours and then be like, cool, I can do that now. This is hard stuff. This is hard, and it takes a lot of practice. So what I'm giving you in this class is a lot of tools, a lot of ways to listen, some tricks for writing things down and figuring things out quickly. And then I'm going to give you a ton of things to practice. And I'm going to point you on how to find more things to practice later. But you've got to practice this stuff every day if you want to get good at it. And we'll talk a lot about that when we get into the class. How to practice, what to practice. And in the end, you will be a much better musician for it. So it's worth the practice. You don't need perfect pitch or anything like that. I'll walk you through all that stuff. We're going to develop skills that focus on something called relative pitch, which is something you can learn, again, with practice. So, let's dive in. Really, what those mean is ear training means the ability to recognize music just from the sound of it, training our ears, right? So if someone plays a major chord, I can say that's a major chord. If someone plays a sequence of chords, I can identify what those chords are. If they play a melody, I can write those down. The second thing is oral skills. That's the ability to sing something back. also sometimes called sight singing. That's kind of a fourth term that gets used. Called one of three things. It might be called ear training, it might be called oral skills, and it might be called dictation. Um, Really, what those mean is ear training means the ability to recognize music just from the sound of it, training our ears, right? So if someone plays a major chord, I can say that's a major chord. If someone plays a sequence of chords, I can identify what those chords are. If they play a melody, I can write those down. The second thing is oral skills. That's the ability to sing something back, also sometimes called sight singing. That's kind of a fourth term that gets used. Oral skills would be like you hand me a piece of music, I look at it, and I can sing it. Like, period. It's tricky. And the third is dictation. That really focuses on the writing down part. So I want to, you're going to play something, and I'm going to get some staff paper and traditional notation, and I'm going to write it down, rhythms and pitch. That's kind of what the three things are. Now, in this class, we're not going to focus very much on the sight singing part, mostly because that's really hard for me to confirm that you're doing it right. There's not a good way for me to give you some music, have you sing it, and then for me to say that was right or that was wrong. And you can't really learn this skill unless you have someone telling you that was right or that was wrong. So for that part of it, I'm going to recommend that you, if you get good at everything we're doing in this class and you want to move on to that sight singing part of it, I'm going to recommend you find yourself a tutor in your area that can help you with that, because it just doesn't work all that great as an online class, but everything else does. So what we're going to focus a lot on is dictation. How to hear something, how to identify it when we hear it, and then how to write it down. This is a lot like, let's say you're a guitar player and you want to be able to play stuff by ear. That's oral skills. It's not so much dictation, but the dictation element of it will be really handy as well, because eventually you might want to write it down. Okay, so that's what we mean when we talk about ear training. It's all of those things. We're going to focus on ear training and dictation in this class. Learning how to identify things that we hear, possibly play them on our instrument, maybe sing them, but definitely be able to write them down. Cool. Require probably 4 semesters of ear training classes. Now, usually the reason for that is that they go hand in hand with music theory. And one of the things we do with oral skills is use it as applied theory. That is another term that you might see, applied theory. What that means is in your music theory class, you're learning how to build, let's say, something simple, major and minor chords. Okay? In ear training, you're going to focus in on what those sound like and how to identify them in the context of a piece of music. So it's like taking the music theory that you learn and applying it, like learning how it works in the real world sometimes, right? Because we're looking at, real music here, not examples. Although we are going to work with a lot of examples. So it can help you kind of get more comfortable with music theory. It can also help you with your instrument. If you play an instrument or you're a singer, it's going to help you at sight reading, because you're going to be able to look at the music and know how it's supposed to sound, and you'll know if you played it right or wrong. It's also kind of just a really fun skill to have, right? You want to hear a song on the radio and play it on your guitar. You could look up the tab for it, or you could just do it. If you're good at ear training, you'll be able to hear that song and think about it for a minute and say, yeah, okay, I get it. I can do that. And then pick up a guitar and play it. Most of the time, when I hear a song, assuming it's a relatively simple song, I'm not talking about like real complex, like odd metered metal stuff here, but like assuming a normal pop song, if I hear it played on a guitar, I could write it down. I could write down the chord charts, or write down instructions for how to play it on guitar without picking up a guitar. That's actually not that tricky of a skill to get, and I'll walk you through that shortly. So it's cool just to be able to say, yeah, here's how you play that. And then you could teach it to someone, or you could just pick up a guitar and play it. It's kind of neat, right? And that's true on all instruments: piano, clarinet, flute, whatever. Listen, be able to play it back. These skills, the way I'm talking about them now, sound very, it sounds like witchcraft and sorcery to be able to do, but it's really not. There are some techniques that we're going to go over in this class that walk you through how to approach things, what to listen for specifically, and kind of how to focus your ear on certain things that will give you clues as to what's going on. You do not need perfect pitch to do this. We're going to talk more about perfect pitch and what that really means in a minute, but if you don't have perfect pitch, don't worry. You don't need it. In fact, if you do have perfect pitch, there's no reason for you to be in this class, because you don't need any of the techniques that I'm going to show you. So just keep that in mind. If you're not any good at this, you're in the right place. Okay. Let's talk about dictation.
चांद का डिक्टेशन डिक्टेशन आपसे प्राइवेट की करना गया था.
That's going to be important when we get down to dictation for two reasons. One is notation, right? So when we do the dictation stuff, I'm going to assume you know how to notate things. Okay, so if I say write a half note and then 2 quarter notes, you know how to do that. If you don't know how to do that, please review the first couple music theory classes in my music theory sequence. That will help you with that. But I'm going to assume a basic understanding of music notation here. The other reason that music theory is important is that it gives us clues that we're going to rely on. So, for example, we might hear an interval, and then we say, okay, was that interval an octave? No. Okay, was it close to an octave? Yes. What does that mean? That means it might be a seventh. Was it a major seventh or a minor seventh? And we're going to kind of work on these in our head. So having a familiarity with major sevenths, minor sevenths, all the intervals, and the chords themselves, like basic triad harmony, maybe up to sevenths and stuff like that, will be really helpful. We're not going to get into super advanced music theory in this class. There might be further versions of this down the road where we get into more complicated things, like more chromatic stuff. But for this first class, we're going to keep it relatively simple. We're going to focus on diatonic, like in keys, major and minor keys, notes and rhythms. We're not going to get into really complicated stuff. So you don't need to have finished, college level music theory in order to get this, but should be comfortable with basic notation and basic triad harmony. Cool. And you're going to be like, sweet, I can do ear training. Walk away and impress your friends by hearing a Bach fugue and notating it note for note. You're not going to be able to do that. Ear training is a skill that takes practice. What I'm hoping to give you in this class is tools for you to use and to practice and build that skill. The thing that we always talk about is the ear is a muscle, the brain is a muscle, and you can't just dive into, run a marathon with your ear after, a couple hours long class. It takes practice. You have to do this every day to really get it, because we need our brain and our ear working in conjunction in order to achieve our goals here. So the best way to get good at this is to use these techniques that I'm going to give you, for sure. But do it every day. Set yourself a goal of doing 5 minutes of dictation a day, and I'm going to give you a bunch of stuff to practice with. 5 minutes a day, but every day do one thing. After a while, it'll start to click, and you'll be doing it. But it's going to be frustrating, and it's hard. This is not easy. This is hard stuff, and it takes a lot of practice. It's just like another instrument. So you have to practice. You have to work on it. There's no silver bullets here. There's no magic way to do this. But you've come as close as possible to finding the silver bullet in finding this class, because I'm going to give you all the techniques that I learned over the years and the methods that I use when I'm hearing something and trying to figure it out. So, speaking of techniques that I've used over the years, I want to use one video to talk about my tortured history of this class. So let's go to a new video and talk about that real quick.
I do a torture history.
It was just in him. He just did it. You want to learn composition with someone who struggled to get it right, who learned painfully every technique and idea that they had, because they're the ones that are going to know how to teach it. So if you believe that theory, then you're going to have a great time in this class, because ear training did not come easy to me. When I had to do this stuff in college, I struggled through it. I had a miserable time. I did not like it, and I swore I would never be wrapped into teaching it, to be honest. The reason I am teaching it now is because I've been working on how to go about teaching it in a way that would be less painful than the way I had to learn it for quite a while. And I think I finally come up with a curriculum that will be better than what I had to do. But I struggled, man. I sat in practice rooms for hours and hours every day trying to get it right. And eventually I did. But I've always kind of been looking for a better way. And I think I have boiled down all the techniques that I've figured out for myself and combined them with some techniques that have now become common practice to teach. But yeah, this is not stuff that comes just naturally to me. This is something I had to learn to do, and I had to practice a lot to get it. So don't feel bad if this doesn't click right away. It's hard stuff. It's not easy. Okay, let's move on. And I just said, like, how does it work? Like, how do you know? And their answer, so perfect pitch is the ability to hear a note and just know what that note is. Hear a chord and be able to identify all the notes in it. For example, if I did this and you said, oh, that's a B natural, you might have perfect pitch. There's a lot of myths around perfect pitch. So let me tell you what are facts. Perfect pitch is more common in countries whose native language is a pitched language. In other words, it's not very common with native English speakers because pitch doesn't really matter in the way we develop language. Most people that have perfect pitch learn it when they're developing language, really, 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 really young. So we find it more in things like Asian countries who have languages where the pitch of the syllable matters, changes the meaning. We also find it in people who have been raised with music instruction from that very, very early age. There's a way of teaching music called the Suzuki method that starts people on playing instruments really, really, really young. Those people sometimes develop perfect pitch. Not always, but sometimes. If you are an adult, a young adult, and you don't have perfect pitch, you are probably not going to develop perfect pitch. There are some books and courses and methods out there to help you get perfect pitch, and that promise to give you perfect pitch if you pay some amount of money. Those are all scams and don't work. So don't do that. You won't get perfect pitch. If you don't have perfect pitch now, you will probably never develop perfect pitch. But there's good news. The good news is you don't need it. You don't need it to do this stuff. I've looked at some of these methods for developing perfect pitch, and they do things like colors, like associating every pitch with a color, because that's how I have some friends who have perfect pitch. I don't. And one time I was having a conversation with this friend of mine who had perfect pitch, and I just said, like, how does it work? Like, how do you know? And their answer was like, how do you not? Like, they just don't get it. It's just like they just understand it like so deeply. And what we figured out was a good comparison was like this. Like, I can look at this and say that's blue, right? Most people will probably look at that and say that's blue. It just is. There's no like anything about it. It's blue. And to someone with perfect pitch, it works the same. They hear a note and say, well, that's B. That's just what it is. So it's just really it's a memory thing, right? Like they heard the pitch at one point and they memorized the exact pitch and put a name on it, and they never forgot it. Most of us can't do that. So, like I said, you don't need perfect pitch. In fact, there are some cases where having perfect pitch makes you less good at the dictation stuff that we're going to do. Not always, but sometimes. Because sometimes we might say, okay, I'm going to play something and I want you to write it down in a different key. And people with perfect pitch can really struggle with that. More on that in a minute. So, if you don't have perfect pitch, and if we're not going to rely on perfect pitch in this class, which we're not, what are you going to use? Well, we're going to focus on something called relative pitch. Relative pitch, unlike perfect pitch, is something that you can develop with practice. So let's go to a new video and let me explain what relative pitch is.
Wrote all this in a separate hard copy book. Just going through this, just revising.
Okay, so here's what relative pitch means. Relative pitch means I'm going to give you a pitch and then tell you to find another note, but you have a reference. Here's an example. I'm promising myself I'm going to sing as little as possible in this class because you don't want to hear me sing. But just as an example, I have my little Mbira here. So here's a C. Okay, so there's a C. Now my job is to sing D. Okay. So here's a C, here's the D. So I was right. So given a reference tone, find another tone. That's relative pitch. So you can always find a pitch relative to another pitch. So in these dictation tests, relative pitch is usually assumed. So that means that if you were taking a dictation exam, the person giving the exam might say, okay, here's a C. They're going to play a C on the piano. They're going to say, okay, now write down this melody. And they're going to play a melody. You always have that C as a reference. You know that note is C. So now you just have to find the other notes and relate them back to C. If you hear a B flat, you're going to think, okay, that sounds like a seventh above that C, so that's going to be a B flat. If you hear a note that sounds like a fifth above that C, you're going to say like, oh, that sounds like a fifth above that C, that's a G. So we're always relating back to the reference pitch. Okay? Relative. That's relative pitch. And it is something that you can develop with practice. You probably can already do it a little bit, but with practice, you can get pretty good at it. So that is the skill that we focus on in this class, not perfect pitch. If you have perfect pitch, good on ya. Go take a different class because this one's going to be useless to you. We're focusing on relative pitch. Now there is a third kind of pitch memory, I guess we'll call it. and that is, it's this thing where some people develop perfect pitch on a single instrument. Okay, there's not a great term for this, but some people call it true pitch. So I have true pitch, which means that if somebody plays a note on a guitar and no reference pitch, but it has to be played on a guitar, I can tell you what note that was. This is a bit of an illusion. It's not perfect pitch, first of all. It's not. If you have perfect pitch, it doesn't matter what instrument it's played on, whether it's played on a kazoo or a piano or a didgeridoo, you will be able to identify the pitch instantly. So this thing of this true pitch kind of idea is not perfect pitch. What it is it has more to do with timbre than anything. Timbre is like the sound of the instrument. So if somebody plays a note on the fifth string on the fifth fret, I can identify that because I know the timbre, the sound of that note. That's what I have memorized more so than the pitch. If they strum a chord, I can hear what notes are open strings and what notes are not open strings, and that can pretty much tell me right away what chord they strummed. That comes with just practicing your instrument like a lot. A good way to test if you have this is, other than just like play it on a different instrument, is retune the thing. When a guitar is retuned, that sense of pitch goes all wonky. Like a lot of the time guitar players tune their entire guitar down a half step. And so if someone strums like an E major open chord, I'm going to say that's an E major open chord because I recognize it. But if they're tuned down, it's still an E flat, but it's going to sound like an E major to me anyway. Anyway, don't get bogged down in that. I just want to point this out because a lot of people start to think that they have perfect pitch because they can hear a note on their instrument, on the instrument that they practice really hard, and identify it instantly. But it's a bit of an illusion. You don't have perfect pitch unless you can categorically do it on any instrument. But having this skill, this true pitch skill, is still pretty darn handy. So if you can do it, you should do it. And in fact, there is a way to use it in these kind of dictation ideas. Like when I hear a melody played on piano, what I might do is imagine myself playing it on the guitar, and then I just have to look where my fingers are in my brain, imagine where those fingers are, and then write that down. There is a way to do that, to just kind of visualize myself playing it and then finding it, but it's tricky. So I mention this only because people ask me about this all the time. They're like, I have perfect pitch on the guitar especially, but not on any other instrument. You don't have perfect pitch. That's not perfect pitch. That is maybe what we call true pitch, but it's very different. Still a great skill to have. So good on you for practicing a lot and developing that. And we'll try to find a way to use that in dictation. But what we're really going after here is relative pitch. So here's the hardest part about doing this as an online class, and that is, how do you know when you're right? Because this is really important. Let me give you an example. Let's say you are practicing, and let's say we're just practicing rhythms, right? The first big chunk of stuff we're going to do is just rhythms. So you hear a rhythm, and you write it down, and you're like, sweet, I did it. But how do you know that you did it? How do you know that you're right? So this is something I've really had to struggle with and figure out a way where I could confidently teach this class in an online setting without looking over your work, hearing the same thing you did and looking at it and saying, yes, you're right, or no, you're not right. And more importantly, when you're not right, where did you go wrong, right? Um, that's going to be the trickiest part of this. You need to be sure that when you're right, you're right. And when you're not right, you kind of can figure out where you went wrong. Okay? This is we're really at a disadvantage by not having like another human teacher in this class. So, in these next couple of videos, I'm going to go over ways that I've thought of to make sure that you're right when you're right. Okay, there's a couple of pieces of technology we can use. And then in the next section, we'll talk about ways you can practice. So we've got kind of a lot of busy work before we get into the actual meat and potatoes of the class, but all of this stuff is really important because you really have to know when you're getting it right and when you're not. Okay, so a little update. I finished filming the class and now I'm jumping back to clarify something here. These tools that we're about to go into, and when we go into the how to practice thing, what I'm talking about here is everything that's going to be covered in this class. What I've decided to do is cut this into multiple classes because I want to spend a lot of time on each element and give you tons of things to practice. There's a limit to how many videos I can put in a class. So, in this first class, we're just going to focus on rhythms. So the stuff about pitch, you don't, and especially the tools we're going to go into, you don't necessarily need, but you will need that in the future. So I wanted to leave it in. But in this first class, we're just going to focus on rhythms. So just keep that in mind as we get through these next couple of videos where I'm talking about how to make sure that your pitch is correct. Just rhythms in this class. Okay, the first way that I want to talk about is just using a tuner. Okay, so you might have a tuner laying around for your guitar or whatever instrument you happen to have. There are a number of software ones. The one I have here is just an app that's built into my phone. It's actually really accurate. This particular app is called D-Tune, like D apostrophe tune. It's made by Diodario, who makes strings. And it's just telling you what pitch is playing. So this isn't super great for melodies because pitches are going by kind of too fast for it really to latch onto, but it's good for single notes. So it's a starting point to tell you what pitch is actually happening, right? So if you're going to use a tuner, be sure it's a chromatic tuner. So on this one, if I go into settings, not settings, tunings on this particular app, make sure it's set to chromatic. Okay, this one has like guitar stuff and all kinds of weird stuff. Okay, so now it's going to show me every note that's happening. So if I go back to my cool little Mbira, play a note. Oops, let me play it close to my phone here.
Nice. I have a tuner too.
And it says that's a C. It's a bit sharp, but that's okay.
Yeah, this is what I was.
Okay, let's play another note. That's a B. It's quite sharp, but that's the nature of a Mbira. So that'll tell you individual pitches if you need to. It's handy to have just to test pitches that you're using. So keep one of these handy. It can be an app. It can be a piece of software on your laptop, or you can get, just little physical handheld tuners. They're really not very expensive, maybe, I don't know, $25 or so. And it looks just like this one on the screen. So it's got a little thing. It may or may not tell you the chromatic pitch, though. So make sure that you're getting a chromatic one that tells you any pitch that's happening. It's not required that you have one of these to get through this class, but they are handy to have just for identifying single notes here and there. Another way you can use it is if you do something like, I know I said we were going to avoid singing in this class, but if you're hearing a melody and there's one particular note you can't find, try to latch on to that note and then sing that note, because then you can sustain it and then you can check against your tuner. So if you're hearing a melody that's like da 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 da, then go, okay, that top note, what note is that? Da 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 da. It's a B. So you can learn to pick apart melodies like that and find individual notes if you have a tuner handy. So good thing to have, not required, but handy. Ear training. What we can do is we can get full little melodies here and we can play them. Right? And then we can try to write them down. The trick would be play them, don't look at the screen, and try to write them down. Now, what's handy about this is that there is a website, the MuseScore website has like millions of files that you can download. So you could download them, not look, and write them down. And then when you're done, look and confirm that you got it right. Now, before you go off and download MuseScore, there's like a super confusing thing about this, and it drives me nuts that they did this. But there is a desktop version of MuseScore. That's what I'm using here. And there's a tablet version of MuseScore for like iPads and other tablets. The desktop one lets you make stuff and it's free. The iPad one is not free, costs a couple bucks, and it doesn't let you make stuff. It's just a player. So for music theory, I was saying get the desktop one if you can. But that little player app will work just fine. Because we might not need to make melodies. What we really want to do is find things other people have made and then just play them. So we tell MuseScore, play it, we don't look, we write it down, and eventually we look. So these tools can be really handy. I think later on in the class I'm going to give you some MuseScore files. I'm going to give you like a ton of things to practice at the end of this class, so don't worry too much about that. But getting access to all those MuseScore files that are online will give you kind of an unlimited amount of stuff to practice. I think you need like a pro account or something like that now to download stuff from MuseScore, which is another thing that they changed recently, which kind of sucks. But if you want access to all those things and be able to practice with them, that's a good one. There are some other apps for tablets that are, I think, better than the tablet version of MuseScore. So, if you're on a desktop, MuseScore, awesome. Okay? If you're on a tablet, I might recommend some other things. Let's go to a new video and let me tell you about some of the tablet applications that I recommend.
All tablet as a computer.
Okay, there are a lot of iPad and other tablet apps available for music notation that'll help you. I think the best one I've found is this one called Notion. This lets you do full like composition in the tablet. I really like it. But there are more actually. There's a whole bunch of apps that are just like readers, which can be just fine for our purposes here. I haven't used this app, but these are ones that, just play music. And if we go down to here, you can see a whole bunch more. I Write Music SE, Score Creator, probably not that one maybe. I don't know what that is. There's MuseScore, some other ones. Piano Plus, Sheet Music. These are probably all good ones. The thing to look for in any of these is we want access to a bunch of music. So if I click on this, it looks like this is letting us write stuff, kind of a weird interface. But we want something with like a database of music that we can play with. Notate me now. Oh, that's kind of neat. Doesn't have very good reviews. So look around on these and see if you can find one that comes with a database full of music. That's going to be the easiest thing to use to practice. One last tool that would be handy to have is a metronome. When we start working on rhythms, you're going to want to be thinking in terms of a metronome, and having an actual metronome can help you. A metronome is just something that keeps the beat. It just kind of helps you emphasize where the downbeats are. So this is a metronome that I use. This is kind of a fancy one. You don't need one this fancy, but basically what it does is I hit start and it plays the tempo. I can adjust the tempo and slow it down. So I use this to practice when I'm playing something, so I can learn to play it slow. I turn the metronome up a little bit, learn to play a little bit faster, etc. The way this will help us is when you're trying to figure out a rhythm, you're going to want to hear especially what notes fall right on the beat and what notes fall in between the beats. So anytime there's a tick, that's on the beat. We can actually emphasize the downbeat. Now we have a downbeat, right? Because we're in 4/4, so there's going to be every 4 is going to be one of those. On this particular metronome, you can change the meter. You can do all kinds of weird stuff. You can even do my favorite thing, which is to change it to a person kind of yelling at you.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2.
And then you can add
4.
eighth notes.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Oops, 16th notes. There we go.
2 and 3.
There's
and
eighth notes.
4 and
Here's
1,
16th notes.
And 2 and 3 and 4 and 1
And 64th notes.
And 3 and 4 and 1
They're triplets.
and 2 and 3 and
And then crank it up real fast. Oops.
E and E2, E and A3, E and A4, E and A1, E and A2, E and A3, E and A4, E and A1, E and A2, E and A3, E and A4, E and A1, E and A2, E and A3, E and A4,
Anyway, this thing's a lot of fun on its own. Anyway, so having one of those would be handy. You can get these. You don't have to go out and buy a box like this. You can get cheap little ones that are like the size of a credit card. You can get an app on your phone or your desktop, and those will all work just fine. So having a metronome might be kind of handy for you. What I said earlier and what everybody always says when they talk about ear training, the ear is a muscle. And that's true, but really, we're talking about our brain here. If you can hear frequencies, that's great. Everyone can hear, well, most people can hear frequencies, but the real trick is to process those frequencies, turn them into a pitch, relate them to other pitches, and write them down. So the majority of this goes into our brain. So it takes practice. The first thing I want to give you as a way to practice is just to try to get in the habit of, while you're learning how to do this, a melody a day. A melody a day is going to be the best thing to keep the doctor away. No, not keep the doctor away, but to work on this skill. After you're done with this class, if you have a book of melodies that you can pull from, any tune that you don't already know, that's going to be the best one for you. Although starting with things that you do know is also helpful. We'll talk about some ways to reference things you already do know once we get into working on identifying melodies. But just one short melody every day will be a great way for you to work on this. You'll find that it might take you an hour to figure out and write down a melody accurately. Then the next day, it might take you slightly less than an hour. And after you do that for a while, eventually you'll get pretty fast at it. But it's tricky, right? It takes time. It takes practice. So I would recommend getting a book of melodies. I'll talk about that in just a minute. And working through one a day. In the morning, hash your way through one. Try to write it down. See if you're right. Figure out where you went wrong. And go from there. And remember, a really crucial thing here is knowing that you're right and knowing where you went wrong. Okay, so at the end of this class, you'll be able to do this, I think, pretty well. But you should be able to look at what you wrote down for a melody and then look at what the melody actually is and then say, okay, I thought that was a major third, so I wrote a major third there, but it was a minor third. Okay, so perhaps I should practice identifying major and minor thirds, melodic intervals, right? So just figure out a system where you can really figure out how to identify that you're right or wrong. Let's talk about finding things to practice, like books and things like that.
Even close the door. Hmm.
Okay. Um, you can find books if you want that are just big, huge lists of kind of random melodies. I have one here. This is not a book I used in school. I actually can't find the book I used in school for some reason, but um, this is something I found like at an estate sale at some point. But supplementary sight singing exercises. Uh, just a bunch of melodies. Just notes, notes on notes on notes. So what I can do with this is I can jump into any single measure or multiple measures and just have those played for me. So somebody play them, and then I try to write them down. Or you could plug them into music. You could plug a bunch of them into MuseScore, and then try to kind of forget what they were, and then a couple days later play them one at a time. Um, but you don't have to get a book like that. You can find books of like melody books like that on Amazon or whatever. But also, like, this is a handy one. This is just some violin solos. I was just kind of flipping through sheet music I had. Notes. It's all we really need. Kind of flipping through sheet music. One, this is just some violin solos. I was just kind of flipping through sheet music I had. Notes. It's all we really need. You don't want anything too complicated, and you don't want anything you know very well, right? You don't want Mary Had a Little Lamb, because you could probably write that down from memory after relatively easily after you learn some techniques. So just any book of notes. Other things. I'm going to give you a bunch of stuff to practice in this class, and you can practice them more than once. Not everything has to be completely new to you, so long as you don't memorize the answer. So of the practice things that I give you, do them all, and then when you're done, go back to the beginning, do them all again for more practice. It's just when you find yourself like remembering how to write something down when you hear it because you know that melody, that's when that one isn't useful anymore. So I'll give you a bunch of those. MuseScore files, you can find millions of MuseScore files all over the internet. Download some, pick a couple bars, hit play, write it down. Just try not to look at the screen. I'm also planning to, I can't say for sure that these will exist, but I'm planning to release in the future, if this class has a lot of students in it, I'll release kind of updates of practice packs, like another 20 videos, each has 3 melodies in it or something like that, and just kind of add on to this later. So keep an eye out for that. Hopefully there will be more coming soon. Okay, next thing, kind of last thing in this kind of how to practice thing. There's one kind of little game that I used to play to practice this kind of stuff, and it's really fun. So let me walk you through what that is, and maybe you'll decide you want to do it. Okay, so this little game takes 2 people. That's the trick. But the other person that you get to help you with this does not need to know anything about music. They don't need to know anything about anything. Okay? So here's what you do. You can sit down at a piano. You can sit down on piano is the easiest. Any instrument that the other person plays, but if they don't play any instrument, sit them in front of a piano or a keyboard or anything. I'm going to use Ableton here, but I just have a piano queued up. So you can use software, you can use whatever you want. So what you do is you teach your friend where C is. Okay, just say this button right here, that is a C. Okay, so then you say, okay, play a C and then play any other white key on the keyboard. So there's their C.
I'm writing. won't be beyond that.
E, and then they're going to play another note, that note. Okay, and then your job is to not look at their fingers and identify that second note. So you're going to think about it, you're going to think, you can say play it again, play both notes again. You can say, okay, that sounds to me like a major third. So then that second note has to be an E. And then look down at the keyboard, say which note did you play. They'll say that one, and you say that's an E. I was right. Cool. And then you say, okay, play a C again. Play any other note. And then they play that note. You say, okay, that sounds like, go through the process again, figure out what that other note is. Then, when you get more advanced with that, tell them to maybe play two notes. Okay, so play C, and then play two other notes, one at a time. Okay, now you got to figure out what those two notes were. So you'll think through, you'll use the skills that you learned in this class, and you'll figure out what those other two notes are. They are F and D, by the way. Then, once you get good at that, tell them, okay, now you can use black notes also. So any note. So then you get, they play a C, and then they play, and now you're into chromatic stuff, and that's like pretty advanced. But if you can get good at that, then you're good at it. So this is just a fun little game you can play with someone, helps you identify intervals, figure out notes. It's not full dictation of melodies, but this particular skill will be a huge step forward if you can get good at it. So it's a great way to practice. It's also, a fun little party trick. If you have really nerdy friends like I do, and you want to play a little fun little party game, you can do that. Cool. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about notation, and then we're getting into it. Okay, quick word about notation. Now, like I said earlier, I'm assuming you've been through some of my music theory classes or some music theory classes in general. Things that you may want to brush up on, or at least be sure that you are comfortable with. First, the treble clef staff. That's where we're going to be focusing most of our time. We might get into bass clef, and we might get into a grand staff, but most of the time in this class, we're going to be focusing on our treble clef staff. Be sure you're comfortable with time signatures, 4/4, 3/4, 6/8, 9/8, maybe some of the odd ones, 7/8, 5/8. The piano keyboard. You don't have to be able to play the piano, but you do have to be able to find a note on the piano. If I say, where's the B flat on the piano, you should be able to find that. That'll be a useful skill for you to have to get through this material. Also, rhythm notation. This stuff up here. Whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes. Probably won't get any smaller than that, but probably triplets. Okay, so eighth note triplets probably be about as fast as we get in this class. And also rests of the same value. So eighth notes rests, quarter note rests, whole note, half note rest, 16th note rests. Flats and sharps, of course, although mostly what we're going to be doing for this class is going to be diatonic, meaning we're going to be in keys, so it's not going to be completely chromatic. That is a skill that you should have, but that's pretty advanced. So we're going to be focusing on being in keys. So you will need flats and sharps, But because of the way that we focus on relative pitch, the key doesn't matter so much. Like if I said, here's a C, find an E. If I said, here's a F sharp, find an A sharp, you're looking for a major third either way. So that actually doesn't matter too much. But be familiar with those symbols. Probably no double flats or sharps or anything goofy like that in this class. But I think that's it. So just be sure you're at least that much comfortable with notation. Yeah. Okay. So let's dive in to rhythms. So this first chunk, we're going to focus on rhythms, identifying and writing down rhythms.
The reason I'm silent is I'm looking for a video that spell music as well.
Let me know if this sounds familiar at all. You've been learning piano for a few months and you've kind of kept it separate from your music making until you get good enough at piano to be able to use it to make music. Then one day you're making music and you've made a sick drum track and you're like, fuck, I need some chords, but I don't really want to sample anymore because I've been practicing piano. How hard could this be? You see the keyboard in the corner of your eye, you move towards it, your hands descend upon the keys, and bullshit. Hang on. Chords were a little bit ambitious for the first time. Let's just try a quick melody in the right hand. Bullshit. Everything you do sounds terrible. You have no idea where to start, and you end up deciding, fuck it, this whole piano thing, it's gonna take years, and you quit. That was me every 3 months for like 3 or 4 years. And one of my favorite producer YouTubers just committed to learning the piano, and I can see this becoming him if he's not careful. And it's not because we just need to work a bit harder.
Merry fucking Christmas!
It's simply because the traditional techniques used to learn piano are great for people who want to learn to play other people's songs, but absolutely terrible for people who want to learn to make their own. For that, we need something different. And I think I found it. This is Bob. He's been playing piano for 15 years and he sounds like this. Now by contrast, about the most impressive thing that I can play is this. Now to be fair to myself, I've only been learning piano on and off for a few years, but I don't think that's the biggest difference between us. If you asked Bob to write a song on the piano, he'd probably shit himself. But if you instead asked him to learn this, he could probably do that in a couple hours. Now if you gave me a week to learn that, I don't even think I'd be able to do it. But it only took me a few hours to write this. And this. And this.
Look at all the time you wasted writing your
And that's just down to exactly how we learn to play the piano. Bob's classically trained, which means that every bit of effort he put in every week for like 10 plus years was all going towards the goal of playing really difficult pieces written by great composers really, really well. And I did the exact same thing. I learned violin for 10 years, but despite 10 years of practice, I can't write a melody on my violin for shit. When I want a string part, I literally write it on piano, then I'll go get my violin and record it in later. Now, since 90% of people just want to learn how to play their favorite songs, 90% of tutorials are just going to teach that skill set. It explains why it's so easy for people like us to get lost in this sea of tutorials, learning things that we don't even need. It explains why it's so easy for people like us to quit after a few months because we're just not getting what we need out of these tutorials.
I've tried learning keys in the past. You know, I went and got a little course online, followed it for a week or two, and then I gave up.
Now, I would love to be able to play as well as Bob can. I really would, but if I could only choose one, I know what's more important to me. What's more important to me is being able to sit down and write the chords which fit perfectly with that drum loop that I've made, or to sit down and capture a feeling of nostalgia that I have, or to sit down and listen to a Frank Ocean song, hear the chords, understand why they work, and then transplant it into my music. In my opinion, most of the battle as an artist is knowing what to play, and if we never develop the skill, we're going to sit down at the piano with all the piano chops in the world and have no idea what to play. And somehow we still expect to, even though all we've ever done is listen to someone else who tells us what notes to play. And to do that, we need a methodology that's going to teach us the language of music, not just how to read out something someone else has written, but fuck me, a methodology that teaches language and syntax and all the technical shit. That's got to sound technical and super soul crushing, right? Actually, no. No, it doesn't. It's jazz. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh my god, I've heard jazz is super difficult. I'm never going to be able to play that. Relax. I'm not a jazz musician. What I'm going to talk about is the absolute basics. It's all I've needed to make the best music I've ever made. If you weren't thinking that, you were probably thinking, Seb, I like pop music, I fucking hate jazz. Relax. In the same way you can divide classical music and classical training as like a method for learning an instrument, we're going to divide the sound of jazz and the jazz methodology and way of learning an instrument into two separate things. The method is what we jazz methodology as like a method for learning an instrument, we're going to divide the sound of jazz and the jazz methodology and
Yeah, I kind of know what he's talking about. Was I was trying to okay. Dramatic.
way of learning an instrument into two separate things. The method is what we are going to focus on. Now, why is the jazz method the solution to all my problems? Well, before jazz was invented in the late 19th century, pretty much the only way to learn an instrument was through classical training, which had one clear goal: get good enough to be able to read and play the stuff that old dead white guys had written hundreds of years ago. The musician was just the vessel through which the composer was heard. And it kind of mirrored the times. Like, this was the time of kings and queens and shit. Like, you were just an atom in the world of a monarch, and as a musician, an atom in the world of a composer. Fast forward to when jazz came out, and it wasn't just the sound of it that caused riots, it was the fact that the musicians were literally making shit up as they went, and not relying on what composers had written. Not to mention that it was black people making this awesome music. Since the musicians understood the language of what they were playing, they didn't have to rely on the composers. And for the first time in Western music history, the musicians were the composers. Now, this is perfect for us producers and artists because it means that we don't need to reinvent the wheel when we're trying to learn the piano. We can just take the basic foundations of the jazz method and apply it to any type of music that we like. It can help us understand why the chords and melodies in a specific genre or from a specific artist sound the way they do, and then help us to write stuff like that. There's an entire side of YouTube with musicians who talk about this shit all the time, but I think one of the reasons that the producers have a lot of the time never heard of this is because everyone's so petrified of music theory. And spoilers, if you want to make it to the promised land, I think like that. There's an entire side of YouTube with musicians.
You know what, Johnny? You know what, Johnny? Years of life.
Who talk about this shit all the time
Oh, wait.
help us to write stuff like that. There's an entire side of YouTube with musicians who
Sound Fujita music. Okay, that. Hmm, Say it there. Oh, promo. Is it there? There. Yeah. Oh, wait.
talk about this shit all the time. Us to write stuff like that. There's an entire side of YouTube with musicians who talk about this shit all the time, but I think one of the reasons that the producers have a lot of the time never heard of this is because everyone's so petrified. I think one of the reasons that there's an entire side of YouTube with musicians who talk about
Learn jazz standard. Okay. Who's quarter million subscribers?
this shit all the time, but I think
Wait. For a while, but yeah. I think like how to write hardcore. Who are these people? No, just keep it. Or yeah.
I think one of the reasons that the producers entire side of YouTube with musicians who talk about this shit all the time, but I think one of the reasons
Charles one. Or
that the producers have a lot of the time never heard of this is because everyone's so petrified of music theory. And spoilers, if you want to make it to the promised land, you're gonna have to learn some music theory. Okay, so if the first half of this video was to try and convince you of this approach, I want the second half to be to try and clarify what it actually looks like by showing you the skills that you'll want to work towards in this approach. They'll take a while to master, but as soon as you get on the path towards developing them, I think you'll approach music completely differently. I want you to kind of treat this video like a glossary of like where you want to get to and then find resources around it to get you there. Just quickly, I'm not a piano teacher and I'm not going to teach you piano. This is just the approach that's helped an artist and producer make the best music of his life. Alright, let's do it. Part 0, Foundations. I'm not even going to call it Part 1 because these are foundational and you're probably going to learn them anyway and you can't skip them, so let's get straight in. So I'm going to split it into 2 parts. You've got your basic piano skills and then you've got your basic music theory. For basic piano skills, these are basically the things that you were going to learn anyway from piano or like a beginner piano course. You should be comfortable doing things like playing a major scale in a few different keys, playing the triads in each of those keys with maybe with a bass note in the left hand, and then maybe a few inversions and maybe even a couple of little basic songs. Basically what I'm saying is I want you to get to a point where you've been at the piano for a few weeks or a few months and it doesn't feel completely foreign to you. Now as for the basic music theory stuff, people tend to skip it. and you can kind of get away with that if you're just going to play other people's songs, but if you want to make your own, you just can't. End of story. I'll link Andrew Huang's 30-minute video where he goes over all the basic stuff for music theory. That's pretty much got everything, but I just want to highlight 3 key areas that I think are most important for us going forward. The first one's the major scale. It's the most basic thing in music and everything builds off it, so you need to understand it at a pretty good level. So things like scale degrees, the distance between each of the scale degrees, and then, for example, if I asked you like what scale starts on the 6th scale degree, you would need to instantly be able to answer that pretty easily. The second one is the diatonic triads in the major scale. So that's just basically knowing what quality each chord is at each different scale degree. So that'd be major, minor, or half diminished. And you probably want to know why. So the third one is slightly optional, but once you get to the first actual skill in this video, you're probably going to need it anyway. And that's basic functional harmony. And what I mean by that is just knowing what each of the different chords from the different scale degrees, what they feel like and where they generally want to pull. So for example, this is a little bit crude, but knowing that the 5 chord pretty much always wants to pull to the 1 chord, or knowing that the 6 chord feels like an alternative home to the 1 chord, just slightly sadder and like minor. But obviously, huge generalizations, but you get the idea. Now, I might have said a lot of words that you have no idea what they mean, and that's okay. This video and me saying those words is so that you can look them up and learn as you progress. So moving on from the basics, in my opinion, the traditional method of learning to play other people's songs requires 2 skills. First is piano dexterity, which is physically the ability to move your fingers where you want to move them. And then the second one is the ability to read, so knowing that this is supposed to sound like this. So if we instead want to be able to make our own music, we've got to remove that second skill and replace it with 2 new skills. The first skill allows us to listen and get ideas from other people's music, and the second skill allows us to use those ideas to make our own music. Let's turn this on actually. So I did this segment before, but I did it with ideas to listen, and we've got to... So if we instead want to be able to make our own music, we read, so knowing that this is supposed to sound like this. So if we instead want to be able to make our own music, we've got to remove that second skill and replace it with 2 new skills. The first skill allows us to listen and get ideas from other people's music, and the second skill
Man,
allows us to use those ideas to make our own music. Let's turn this on actually. So I did this segment before, but I did it with a Billie Eilish song, the top song on the charts. And then realized that it's definitely copyrighted. So instead I've gone onto YouTube and found just the first no copyright music thing I could hear, and I have never heard it before. I'm gonna press play and we'll see if we can work out the chords. Yeah. it's kind of funny it was that song, because I've heard that song before. I swear it's not copyright free, but we'll see, won't we? So what I did there is just worked out the basic triads, but given a bit more time, I could probably do it with the melodies and more complex stuff. And there are people who are so much better at this than me, but I think that the basic triads and being able to do it like that is all you need to completely transform the way you make music. If you can identify what the different chord changes are in music you like, you can start to transplant that into your own music. And it's also a snowball effect. Like, as soon as you start being able to do this, every time you're listening to music, you'll be able to listen for those changes, and you'll just continually get better and better and better. And even if your actual piano playing is lagging behind, if you can hear what's going on in music that you like, you can still kind of do the same thing with MIDI. I just can't overstate how important of a skill this was for me to learn. In literally 5 years of making music, this was the single biggest paradigm shift I've ever had, and it only took me a few weeks to get started. I just didn't know it existed at the beginning. If you have no idea how to write a good chord progression, and I have no idea how anyone does it, you need this skill. If you can already understand some chord theory, but you hate the chord progressions you write, you need this skill. And if you are a whiz on the piano, can play incredible pieces, but still can't write for shit, you need this skill. Okay, so we've done some listening, we've got some cool musical ideas. How do we make something with it? So that doesn't sound very advanced, does it? But even with just that ability of improv, it's completely changed the way I make music, because if you literally turn on your record function for about 10 minutes, mess around on the keys and playing some chords or playing some melodies, you can chop up and find a couple of nice ideas and then extrapolate from there. And a lot of the time, you will never have been able to come up with those ideas without just flowing on the piano. Seriously hesitant to tell you how I do this, because I'm not very good, and basic jazz improv lessons are probably a way better place to start. But basically all I'm trying to do there is hit chord tones, which means in my right hand I'm trying to hit a third, a fifth, or a seventh, or sometimes the root of whatever chord I'm playing in my left hand, or whatever chord is already being played by a backing track or something. After you've watched some of those basic tutorials, you could get started by using a jazz backing track, or you could go and find your favorite song, transcribe the chords because you've now got that skill, and then improvise over it with your right hand. You could also do the other way and then transcribe the melody and then improvise some chords underneath it, but that's slightly different as well. And if you start to improv even a little bit, you might just look up and realize, holy shit, this is exactly why I wanted to learn the piano in the first place. You're here, you just got to keep going. Now I get it, those are two really big skills and they can seem super scary right now, but if you've already committed to learning the piano, you've probably already accepted that it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. All this is doing is shifting what you are focusing on during that effort. And at least for me, shifting focus towards these skills rather than just rote learning a bunch of songs has taken the exact same amount of effort, but it's completely changed the way that I make music. And because they're skills, it means that if you follow the traditional piano learning path, you're not just going to magically one day be good at them. You've got to have practiced them. So you might as well start now. So where does jazz come back into all of this? Well, apart from those two skills being fundamental to it, I'd kind of say that as soon as you can, well, apart from those two skills, we'll start now. So where does jazz come back into all of this? Well, apart from those two skills being fundamental to it, I'd kind of say that as soon as you can, I'd default towards searching for basic jazz piano tutorials rather than just the basic piano tutorials. And I think that that's because that they will waste a lot less of your time, because everything they do is going to be focused around getting to a point which is kind of like this. When LJ tried to learn guitar, obviously he had to start with some basic chords. But since he likes slightly spicier chords, there was no way these were ever going to work in his music.
Alright, that sounds whack.
And I'm sure it made him feel like it was going to have to be years until he was actually able to play anything that he would use in his music. And I don't think it has to be that way. So what does my piano practice routine look like? This year it's comprised of two parts. So I've had the technique part and then I've had the songs part. The technique part I've taken from this one super long video by Piano with Johnny. It's been a godsend because I've just been able to work through all the 12 keys and get really good at the basics of jazz piano, if you can even call it that. The fact that it's focused on shell voicing seventh chords has been an absolute game changer because it means that I can actually use them in my music because they sound quite good. And the second part, which has been songs, I've basically been transcribing some basic jazz standards by ear ear and checking my transcription with people online, I thought it'd be a lot harder to, and it's been okay. I've been going alright so far. And then I've been practicing doing some improv over the sections which are built for improv. So yeah, this is doing some, it'll be a lot of basic jazz, good. And this has been another basics part I've taken from this one super, the technique part, piano practice routine look like. This year it's comprised of two parts, so I've had the technique part, and then I've had the songs part.
See three people, three views basically. That was not looking at the time. 240.
The technique part I've taken from this one super long video by
Where is it? Fine. Okay, now it's done.
Piano with Johnny. It's been a godsend because I've just been able to work through all the 12 keys and get really good at the basics of jazz piano, if you can even call it that. The fact that it's focused on shell voicing seventh chords has been an absolute game changer because it means that I can actually use them in my music because they sound quite good. And the second part, which has been songs, I've basically been transcribing some basic jazz standards by ear and checking my transcription with people online. I thought it'd be a lot harder to, and it's been okay. I've been going alright so far. And then I've been practicing doing some improv over the sections which are built for improv. So yeah, this is a very niche video, but I've made it because if it can reach that one person who needs it most, it could be the absolute game changer that they need for their music. But maybe you've gotten to the end of this video and realized you don't actually need help with chords and melodies. You actually need to make your drums hit a bit better. If that's you, I've made a video on what I think is the biggest thing holding back beginner producers from making amazing drums. Just click it, I'll put it somewhere. Here. Nice. I want to one take this. That was the take! Let's go!
In fact, all the things I'm going to play that I'm going to ask you to write down are going to be just a single note. And don't even worry about what note it is. We don't care. We're just going to focus on the rhythm. So, how to approach this? What I want to do is we're gonna do one as though it's a little quiz, and then I'll walk you through what I listen for and how I do it, and give you some techniques. But just to get started, what I really like to do, now you can do this however you want, but I think it's really beneficial to write these down by hand and not really in a notation program. You can if you want, but for me, I like using pencil and a staff paper because I can write really fast. I can scribble on the edges. I can make little notes for myself and say, oh, this was here, this was here. I can do stuff like that. So get some staff paper. You can download a PDF of staff paper anywhere, and get a pencil. Okay, now I'll walk you through my process in a minute. But the way that this works is, and this is true of every ear training exam I've ever taken, you're going to be told a couple things before it gets played. You're going to be told the clef, which doesn't really matter to us right now because we're just focusing on rhythms. The meter, probably. You might have to figure out the meter on your own, but at least for now, I'm going to tell you what the meter is. And this is critical, how many measures. Okay, that's important because it lets you set up the page. Okay, so it tells you what to expect and what kind of rhythms we're looking at. Okay, so I'm going to tell you right now, the only rhythms we're going to use here are quarter notes and half notes. Now, if you're thinking this sounds super easy, I'm just going to skip ahead a couple videos, I would encourage you to not, because we're going to learn some techniques here that you're going to want to use going forward as we get more advanced. So just bear with me. If this is super easy for you, then that's awesome, but just stick with me. Just trust me. Okay, so let's go to a new video and let's do a little practice quiz. So get some staff paper and a pencil and let's try it. Okay, let's do this. Practice quiz. So just do your best. Do whatever you can. Remember, it's just going to be quarter notes and half notes. Don't worry about being right. If you have no idea and just decide to write nothing down, that's fine too. I just kind of want to have us dive in. And then after this, I'm going to do it and I'll walk you through what I listen for each time. So, okay, so treble clef, doesn't really matter. 4/4, 4 measures.
You can't write. Somebody. Oh, this is that. Okay. So red. Okay.
Treble clef, doesn't really matter. 4/4. So, okay, so treble clef, doesn't really matter. 4/4, 4 measures. Okay. Now I would also count you off. Okay, so I'm going to give you the tempo to listen for. I'm going to play this in MuseScore actually, so I have it set up to play a metronome for 1 bar, and then it starts. Okay, so you're going to hear click, 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 and then it starts. Okay. And in fact, I think I'll leave the metronome playing through the whole thing for this first one. Okay. Normally you don't get that, but let's just do that. So you're going to hear the metronome for 1 bar, and then it's going to start. You'll hear 1 note on a piano, and your job is to write down the rhythm that you hear. Okay. So I have MuseScore up here, so it's playing for us. We're going to black out the screen so you can't see MuseScore. And here we go. Okay. Oh, I should also mention, normally you get 3 times through listening to this. Okay. 3 times. So here we go. Attempt number 1. Okay. That's the end. So think about it. I'll give you just, okay. And then it's going to start one note on a piano on the rhythm that you hear. Okay. So I have MuseScore up here, so it's playing for us. We're going to black out the screen so you can't see MuseScore. And here we go. Okay. Oh, I should also mention, normally you get 3 times through listening to this. Okay. 3 times. So here we go. Attempt number 1. Okay, that's the end. So think about it. I'll give you just a minute here. Okay, let's hear it a second time. Same thing, 1 bar of just the metronome and then the rhythm. Here we go. Okay, so think about it, make any notes you need to make, write down as much as you can, and we'll get it a third time. Okay, here we go, third time. Okay, think through it, try to get as much as you can, and when you're ready, go on to the next video. Okay, so I'm still not going to let you see the answer. I'm going to go through it and do it myself and walk you through what I would do. Okay, so here's what I would do. So the teacher says it is treble clef, 4/4, 4 bars. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go here, I'm going to write a treble clef, I'm going to write 4/4, and then I'm going to segment out 4 bars. Okay, now I'm all set up so that as I listen, I can kind of just like mark things along, and I know that it ends here. Okay, that's important. Writing out those bars, just making some space is crucial. Do that step 1. Just mark out 4 bars. Okay, next thing. I'm going to listen for what.
Yes, sir. Have you ever tried with me and can we get any tip? What? I'm still learning. Who is this Sankatika? Have you ever tried voice mixing? No. And if done, can we get any tips or do and don'ts? Really, I don't know how to even operate a, what do you call the software? No, DAW. So no, no. I guess I'm still learning to make music. Sorry, if can't help you.
What lines up on the downbeats? Okay, so we're gonna play it. We hear one bar of just the quarter note, and then I'm gonna listen for what bars have a downbeat. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so now I know I heard downbeats in these spots. I like to just write a stem as I'm going so that I'm not worried about filling in the notes or anything right now. Okay, now the second time through, I'm going to see if I can get all the notes that land on a beat. Okay, so let's just try it. So this is going to be basically all the quarter notes. Oops. Here we go. Okay, did you see what I did there? I wrote quarter notes throughout that. Here, I wrote a quarter note and then I said, there's not a quarter note there. So the absence of a note is important because that means this is probably a half note. And I wrote an X here, meaning there was no note there. So that means this is probably a half note. Then I have ticks on all three of these. And then an X there, which means that is probably a half note. And then two notes there. So that means I've got some X's and some squigglies here, so I could just rewrite it. 2, 3, 4. I'm just recopying what I have above there, but I'm going to use cleaner notation. So this, I think, is my answer. Now, if I needed to hear it a third time, what I would really do is focus in on these spots. Where is there not a note? So I just squiggle out those spots. Say like, okay, there's not a note there. That kind of means everything has to be right on. Okay, so let's go in and see how we did. Okay, and obviously I should mention that if you're using a pencil, you could just erase these and write those correctly. I'm using a pen so that shows up better on the camera. So I just rewrote it. Okay, so this is my answer, and let's look at the screen now and see how we did. 4 quarter notes, 2 half notes, 4 quarter notes, half note, quarter note. Not bad. Obviously, I knew the answer because I wrote the thing in MuseScore, but let's go through that one more time. Steps I would take. First, mark down where there's a downbeat. Okay. Second, mark down all the on beat notes that you hear, notes that are on the beat. Okay, any beat. And sooner or later, you're going to get to where you can do those 2 steps in one move. Okay, that's a practice thing. Then, on the third time through, look for where there's not a note. Okay, so these spots right here, here and here, and here. There's not a note there. Make a note of that. There's a lot of uses of that word note. so that you know your notation has to line up to where there are no notes there. Okay, and how do we know there's not a rest there instead of the notes? Because I told you it's only quarter notes and half notes. You don't really know that in this kind of a sound, so either one would probably be considered correct. Okay, so if you did good on that, great. If you didn't do good on that, that's totally fine. We're going to keep working on this. I'm going to give you some more techniques, okay? So all of those things that I just walked you through, as you practice this, you're going to try to get good at smushing those down and doing those in one step, okay? Let's do another one. Okay, let's do another one. Now, before you do this one, remember those techniques I told you. Right away, write out the number of measures. Think about the time signature. Remember, we're only going to be working with half notes and quarter notes. And strategize what you're going to focus in on each pass. Okay, you're going to get 3 passes. First time, listen for the downbeats. Make sure that if there's a note on the downbeat of the measure, you have a note there. If there's not, put an X or something. Second time, try to get all the notes that line up on a beat, which, because these are only half notes and quarter notes, you know that if there is a note, it has to be on a beat. So with that, you could also think at the same time, where is there not a note? Okay, and that might be enough information for you to get it. Use the third time to double check your work. Okay, so listen for downbeats, listen for all the other beats, listen for where is there not a note, and if you have a time left over, double check your work. You ready? Here we go. All right, treble clef, 4/4, 4 bars. Okay, you know what to do. Now I'm gonna black out the screen so you can't see it. Same as before, you'll get 1 bar of a count in to give you the tempo, and then we'll leave the metronome playing through the piece, and we'll hear it 3 times. Okay, here we go. First hearing. Okay, so think about those downbeats and whatever else you can think about in this first path. Downbeats and missing notes, right? Where are there not notes? Okay, pause the video if you have to. You can take some time here if you want. I'm going to go on to the second listening. Here we go. Number 2. Okay, attempt 2.
I'm sad. Bye.